Hey, thanks everyone. So as Mark was just talking about the process of loading. So basically, as you see in the picture, it involves like first we have identified what content we needed to migrate from our legacy data, which is held on legacy platform. And after that, we planned on the data extraction, which basically meant that we extract the necessary data into the supported formats, similar like XML. We had validation checkpoints at each levels. The data that we needed to target to a target system like RSuite, we transform the data, cleanse it, and then we load or create MarkLogic friendly formats like XML. Speaking of the data loading, we had evaluated multiple tools like MLCP Corp and DMSDK, and then used DMSDK basically for loading the data. We can configure parallel threads and also have the batch sizes as we needed. It was easier for us to track using DMSDK. And finally, the last step, as we call it, a registration, which necessarily means like creating some process or running some queries to create additional files and structure so that the content that we have migrated and loaded into MarkLogic, they appear in the front end of the product, RSuite. We intend to do this in a phased manner, like we have a cutoff date based on which the data will be extracted, transformed, loaded, and registered onto the current platform. Once we have our system up and running with all the validation checkpoints, we will again migrate the remaining Delta documents and go through the same cycle. As we see the agenda that is listed out here, it will talk about the data migration strategy that we just discussed. We'll go to the architecture in the next slide. As we see, the architecture here basically is of the platform that we are currently migrating or going to. This is necessarily the RSuite architecture, which has MarkLogic as the backend XML database to it. It had its own authentication and authorization module. It supports metadata out of the box by creating certain necessary files in the backend. We are using some of the API services, like the Java API is exposed by the product to retrieve certain information about the content and also to create some more files. It has a web-based user interface which initially shows you a file kind of or a folder kind of a structure, but the folder structure is actually represented by XMLs in the backend database. It also has an admin module, which helps us in uploading schemas and do certain tasks related to the user and roles. You can go to the next slide, Mark. Over to you, Ryan, to talk about the registration with.
Yeah, thank you, Sumit, and thank you to MarkLogic to giving us the opportunity to share about this and what we're doing. So as Sumit mentioned, we have this term called registration, which is a big part of our project here. So what is registration? It's a term we're using to talk about the building of necessary data objects that conform to the RSuite data model. These are necessary to take advantage of the RSuite tool and to render your documents. And so why is it required? So loading data to MarkLogic provides greater control over the data for us, and it allows us to take advantage of a lot of the MarkLogic facilities directly on the data for maintenance. And the amount of data to be loaded, it's a sheer amount of data, and this was the easiest way to get it into MarkLogic, again, in a way that also allows us to have control over that data and leverage the MarkLogic facilities. So the result of registration is to build the objects necessary for the RSuite data model. And so I have them listed here. So the content document would be the document that you are intending to store. And then the supporting documents are a resource document, a search document, and then another resource document called the Managed Object Reference resource document. So that's what we mean by registration, is creating these objects to conform to that RSuite data model. Let's go to the next slide. Excuse me. So here we have kind of a simple picture of the data flow and migration. So in the graphic there, you have the registration module. So we've decided to take advantage of the MarkLogic modules, and so our registration code lives there. And we have a bunch of content loaded into the database. And what the registration model does is it goes out and it picks up this content, and there's a lot of our metadata is attached to this content document. And from that metadata, we then produce the RSuite data model objects. Again, the resource, the search, the manage object reference resource. And once these data model objects are produced, we can now take full advantage of the RSuite tool. So some of the challenges, again, as I mentioned, we have a high volume of legacy data. Data loaded needs to match the RSuite data model. And importantly, we need to ensure data integrity of migration content. Tools evaluated, we took a look at the MarkLogic content pump, custom ETL scripts, core DMSDK. And as Sumit started to touch on, our strategy was to extract data from the legacy system with certain target dates, transform the data to align to the target model, and load data into MarkLogic using the data movement SDK based on batches, phase manner with validation checkpoints. And I think it's back to you, Sumit.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. So as we started working on our queries, we needed to write the content to put them into MarkLogic. So after writing those queries, we had figured out, like, if we are using the traditional XQuery functions, it will be taking larger time, because the normal function to try to fetch the entire document to make sure that if we are trying to make any function call, or if you are trying to load anything using those XQueries. So basically, we had gone and written some functions which could be reusable. We wrote multiple XQueries to use to differentiate between the functionalities, and we broken down the MarkLogic queries into different modules so that they're usable and it is easy to maintain, because you can just refer to the module name instead of the entire XQuery file, which is always error prone. We wrote different functions and passed variables, as it was easier for us to handle exceptions when we are making those calls. And once we have written the modules, it reduces the complexity for writing XQueries. We face some challenges while writing the modules, and after we made the changes as suggested by MarkLogic, we were able to obtain the objects. And we also faced some issues which I will talk about related to updating and creating an object in the same transaction in MarkLogic. So we have certain legacy data set that we needed to track and use for the registration map data. We had some incremental metadata attributes and the properties of XML. We had created some field value indexes to make sure that they are accessible using the XQueries. We have range indexes, value indexes, and then we have some path indexes to assist the XPath functions that we had used. And unless we have modified our XQuery function from traditional to the CTS ones, we found that the normal XQuery functions to be more time consuming compared to the CTS using the flower expression. So we have used multiple CTS functions to make sure that our registration or the loading functions are smooth and well as reliable. Next slide. Okay, so we had certain use cases in which, apart from the RSuite graphical user interface, we wanted to make the content loaded into MarkLogic accessible to other third-party applications. So after careful evaluation, we found out that WebDAV and REST APIs can be the ways. So we have created the WebDAV configurations in which the documents that are loaded into MarkLogic could be accessed via the WebDAV protocol, in which the user can directly go ahead and edit the content, and they would necessarily reflect at the RSuite graphical user interface. We also have a REST APIs which we primarily used to write our XQuery modules back into the MarkLogic modules database. And whenever we needed to retrieve, we could also use the REST APIs to make sure that we can use it in any other Java API wherein the XQueries or the modules needed to be referred. So that's something which MarkLogic provides out of the box. Basically, the invoke function. Next slide, please. Here we talk about the core features that we had used. The core features we used were uh, the CTS lexicon, basically, which was very instrumental for us. We had written multiple queries using that CTS annotation, and we found out that they don't necessarily fetch the entire content. We had written certain fragment query, uh, value match queries, so that the documents that we have necessarily migrated have all the legacy information or the metadata as part of the key value metadata pair, as well as the properties. So we were targeting the properties to be incrementally updated by RSuite, while the legacy dataset would be staying in the key value metadata pair. And we were designing the range indexes to make sure that the data that we have loaded, the response time of the functions that we are writing for the registration and other purposes were faster. We have also improved the search matrices by creating certain field values and range indexes. And for the front end to be faster, we have obviously got some role-based access and some encryption using the mechanism of MarkLogic. Out of the box, we have also used indexes on the element and part ranges. And we had done some tuning of the search based on the CTS search APIs. And because of the data that we have migrated into MarkLogic, we had certain queries which tagged them into other collections. Basically, when we are talking about the migration strategy, we have written a query in which if a document is successfully loaded, it will be tagged to a certain collection. In case it goes through a failure, it would be tagged to a failure collection, which would necessarily help us in going ahead and reevaluate the documents that had failed, make changes to it so that it can be reloaded or reattempted next time. Okay, so once we have done the work of migrating the high volume of data, we we had learned some lessons and also some best practices. So the legacy XQuery functions which we have written initially were very efficient because, as I said, they used to fetch the entire document. And the XPath functions were not working unless and until the entire document was fetched. But with the CTS, we overcome that. That's one of the challenges. Then without indexes, the searches used to take a lot of time, even for smaller queries, which necessarily had a handful of or a reduced set of documents. The migration of the document would take a long time unless we did some tuning. So the difference is that when we take minutes, when we are writing the legacy XQuery functions, when we are using the updated CTS functionalities for doing the same, it would take down seconds or even milliseconds. So there's a huge difference among the time taken. So if we are designing such a system, it is better to apply indexing as upfront, as that approach gives us a clear understanding of the responses that we expect for our XQueries. Regarding the modular XQueries, as we said, that it helped us migrate our content in a phased manner with checkpoints in between. Like our main query included the mechanism to tag the different documents. As we have just said, in case of failure, we could also reevaluate the documents based on collections. In any robust system, we implemented the try-catch mechanism in our XQueries to identify and log potential issues. the sooner they were remediated, it helps us better to design the system. When we are developing any process, we believe the modular approach helped us in writing or using certain functionalities among different XQuery modules. And we also ensure that the related functions are grouped together in a single XQuery module rather than spread out. Like we have a function which basically builds folders, and we had put different module just to build the folders, and that module is called by different file types within our system. Suppose we are migrating a particular document type, we just call the build folders for each one of them. Currently we have just tweaked some logic related to it, but it was just about the modular approach. Next slide. Okay, so this slide talks about the challenges that we faced and how we made the decision. When deciding on how to write a function, we prioritized modularity and scalability from the starting. It was essential that each function be modular, have minimal response time, and be scalable to handle the increasing number of documents. Given the large volume and complexity of the migration, it was a critical consideration. During each migration phase, which we closely monitored the performance of our XQuery and their responses, captured the metrics of how much time it took for a certain set of documents. So for example, like one particular document type, as we say, the XML resource type, we tracked how many documents were migrated, the time taken to load, and the time taken to register to create basically the necessary structures in RSuite. That data provided us to estimate how much overall time it will take for migrating the other kinds of content. As Rahan had said earlier, we evaluated different tools like MarkLogic Content Pump, which basically meant that we write a command line tool for bulk loading all our content. But since we had to tweak also the metadata at the time of loading, it necessarily meant that we evaluate other tools. We also evaluated some custom ETL pipelines as the Nifi, Talent, Pentaho. And while we use an ETL tool to extract transform, the point was that we want to have in a one single transaction the document loaded along with all these metadata and properties, which the ETL tools necessarily did not help us. So then we also looked at the BOD, which is like a content reprocessing in bulk. It's a tool by MarkLogic. Once carefully evaluated, we found out that is not going to work because it supports parallel processing though, but it has some checkpointing and error handling, and also we are not using any kind of XQuery transformation. So finally, we moved on to the DM SDK. Basically, it's a Java API based tool provided by MarkLogic. It helps developers to build a scalable data set, and once it is like having all the number of threads and the number of batch size for each transaction, it is easy to have the control on how documents are batch processed and moved across the MarkLogic system. It is a highly flexible tool. It can be integrated with all the processes that is required for such advanced migration scenarios where we have some custom logic or queries. Basically, we fire a query to check if a document already exists before loading it. So DM SDK provided such a framework for us, and hence we had used it. Next slide. I guess Ryan will talk about some of the challenges that we have faced related to registration.
Yeah, thank you, Sumit. So I'm very much still a student of MarkLogic, learning a lot. The next two slides are, some challenges that we faced and the solutions that we were able to come to through some of the MarkLogic facilities and APIs and tools. So kind of as a recap, we're extracting data, we're extracting the metadata for those documents from a legacy system, and then we're pushing it to a MarkLogic database, and then we need to convert, maybe convert's not the right term, but we need to create all of the necessary data model objects for the target system for RSuite, and that's the registration piece. And so, you know, there's a ton of data in the millions of documents that we need to register. And so, one of the challenges that we faced was a restriction on the XQuery language, as we were trying to in the RSuite data model, there's a resource document, and this document holds all the metadata for the document. It also holds metadata for all the versions of that document. And so what we don't know enough to build that resource document until we pick up the first data from the database. And so what that means is we are both trying to, in a software loop, we're both trying to create documents and modify those documents. And you run into a problem there. Here on the slide, we have conflicting updates. And you can't both create, you know, so here, you know, in thread, so you can't do a document insert and modify that document within the same transaction request. And so the problem that we ran into is that in a loop, as we pick up this data and we try to take the metadata and build what we need to build, we were trying to both create the supporting documents for the RSuite data model and modify them, and it was all happening at the same time, running into that conflicting update error. So the way that we overcame that is we were able to utilize MarkLogic's XDMP spawn function. And so essentially, that just allows us to multi-thread our process. And so this was important for overcoming, number one, the issue that I just tried to highlight, and then also with the sheer amount of data that we're trying to register. If we were to try to pick up a chunk of a couple thousand records to try to register, and it was all a single-threaded loop process, and we ran into some sort of issue down the line, some sort of unexpected error that we hadn't handled, it would throw the whole process, right? The whole thing would break, and we'd lose a lot of time there. And so to be able to multi-thread the handling of tens of thousands of documents, it allowed us to handle that in a way that was much safer and recoverable. So that was one of the first challenges, and that's how we overcame that. And if we could go to the next slide, which highlights another. Okay. So this is another one that was very important to us. So I'll just read that top bullet point. So due to the various rules and regulations pertaining to this aircraft data, it's very important data. It's necessary to preserve the legacy system metadata, very critical. We also need to conform to the RSuite data model requirements, and we need a way to preserve certain data in untransformed format. And so we have data that we don't want touched, but then RSuite also needs to be able to manage some metadata in order to continue to manage our documents through their system. And so we were able to take advantage of the fact that MarkLogic provides us with two different ways to store and manage data, two different metadata facilities. One is their metadata facility, and the other is their properties facility. And you can see some examples down below of kind of the difference. One stored in sort of a key value pair, and the other is more of an and then on the right you have that XML format there. So as a result, we can manage both. We can keep our legacy data, critical data, untouched, but we can also conform to the RSuite data model. So that was another big win for us with our project, and it really helped us meet our needs and overcome a challenge. Okay, back to you, Sumit.
Thanks, Ryan. Okay, so here we talk about like why MarkLogic was so much essential for us. Throughout the slides, we have discussed about a lot of functions and features. So necessarily some of the functions that we are trying to say, since MarkLogic is a NoSQL database that supports the ACID properties to ensure the reliable transaction processing. Here is the details, like transaction in MarkLogic are atomic, meaning that all operations within a transaction are either complete or none. So that helps us in preventing any kind of an unwanted error for a certain document. Then we have the consistency, like it ensures that the database moves from one consistent state to another, which also maintains the data integrity. It has the transactions are isolated from each other, so concurrent transactions do not interfere, and it provides a consistent view of the data. And once a transaction is committed, which necessarily means the durability aspect of it, it changes permanently, and the surviving system or the failures will be prevented, because any kind of information that are stored are always retrievable. We also have the systems which are highly available and are not prone to disaster. We have disaster recovery configurations, obviously, for them. We have support for multiple formats, the traditional XML, JSON, as well as the RDF format, which we plan to use for some other similar implementation, wherein we will have that subject predicate kind of object relationship for the RDF framework. It also supports Sparkle and RDF query language as a standard. Then we had used the MarkLogic database as it combines the search engine capabilities and also other XQuery functionalities together in one scale. MarkLogic also has a higher user community, and because of the bigger ecosystem, it helps us with extensive documentation. It also has its trainings and supports third-party integrations. That is necessarily the reason why we have used MarkLogic for the target state for migrating of our high-volume database. With that, we move on to questions.
Raise your hands if you have questions. Sumit and Ryan, it doesn't seem that there are any questions in the room. Thank you very much for the presentation today. We appreciate your ability to join us.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Appreciate
MarkLogic, as well as Boeing, to help us represent at such a bigger event. Slide 15 also talks about some of the references that we can use in case somebody wants to find more about the MarkLogic resources or the related to this DM SDK. Thank you.
Thank you.